Before we get started today, I have something special to share with you. You know how many people I talk to who say, Melissa, I don't even know what I want. I don't have a big vision for my life. And they feel like something's wrong with them. But here's the truth. You're not going to have a clear vision if you haven't gotten intentional about excavating it, about really digging deep into your soul to find it. But once you do, everything changes. And it's not about figuring out what the next 50 years of your life looks like right now. It's more about finding what you do know, leaning into that, and then letting the next step reveal itself. There's actually a process to this. You may have heard me talking about Living Mind Love by now. It's the brand new Mind Love community that will be working towards something for an entire year together in a way that actually fits into your life. Well, our very first month together is all about getting clear on your vision. And if you already have one, we're going even deeper. I've taken everything I've learned from nearly 500 interviews with the world's most brilliant minds, and I've broken it down into simple steps that actually work. You'll be part of the first ever Mind Love community on School, so we get to uncover all of this together. So if you're ready to find your vision, go to mindlove.com/living and join the waitlist, and you'll get instant access to my 10-year vision meditation. So let's get into today's episode. Welcome to Mind Love, episode 164. Today's episode is all about how to decide.
So let me imagine how this little 10-minute trip might go wrong. I could have seen that obstacle that might be in my way. You know, people say to me, but don't you think that you're going to be like negative then, like a Debbie Downer or something? And I'm like, no, because that's actually the way that I'm going to succeed. I'm going to see what can go wrong. And then when I see what can go wrong, I can actually do something about it. And that's going to mean that I'm going to flourish much more in my life. Because when I run against things that go wrong, I'm not going to be sitting there going, I can't believe this is happening to me. I'm so unlucky. How terrible. Woe is me. I'm going to say, well, I knew this was a possibility. And by the way, I have a plan. I'm prepared for this. Or maybe I don't encounter the obstacle at all because I actually thought about it in advance.
Turn up your frequency with Mind Love. Bite-sized brain hacks for seekers, dreamers, and doers. It's time to give your mind a little love with your host, Melissa Monti.
Hi, friends. First of all, if you haven't subscribed to the podcast yet, make sure to hit the subscribe button so you're always updated about new episodes. Plus, you want to know basically the best way to give back to your favorite podcasts? Actually go to the iTunes app and leave a 5-star review. Reviews are scientifically proven to make me love you more. That's just how it is. I love you when you leave me a review. You sit in my heart for days at a time. No, but seriously, they really help the growth of the show. They're probably the number one thing that you can do besides supporting my sponsors or joining the membership. So it's an easy, free way to give back to a podcast you love. And if you do leave me a review, send it to me at MindLoveMelissa on Instagram, and I'll send you a free meditation track. Today, I want to share a review from Becca Cornell. She says, this podcast is one of the best. I think I've listened to every episode. It's eye-opening and soulful, and I learn something new every time. Thanks, Melissa. Well, thank you, Becca. You are one of the best. Why are decisions so hard? And I'd love to say that it's only the big decisions, decisions where we have a lot to lose if the outcome is bad. But let's be real here. That's just not the case. How many of you make the whole table wait when you order a meal? Or you spend more time deciding where to order takeout than it takes to actually eat the food? Or you take hours deciding how to respond to a simple email or text message? We should all know by now that our time is the most valuable resource we have. So why would we willingly waste it on things that are so trivial? Well, it turns out we're not just afraid of the outcome. According to Susan Jeffers, author of Feel the Fear and Do It Anyways, when fear or anxiety pop up during your decision-making, that fear is either based on your belief that you won't be able to handle the outcome of your decision, so there's the whole results part, or on your doubts about whether you have enough correct information to make the best decision. So we don't just have fears and doubts about the outcomes of our decisions, we also have fears and doubts about the whole process of decision-making in general. Looking back, I oddly somehow used to almost pride myself on being indecisive. I'd be ordering food with friends and be like, sorry, I'm just feeling indecisive today, almost like it was cute. Well, guess what? Indecision is not cute. I'll tell you what it is, though. It's annoying. It's also counterproductive, and it's a form of pain. And there are all sorts of consequences. We end up procrastinating so that we don't have to face the decision at all, which then affects our self-belief because we stop trusting ourselves to keep a structure or finish things or even start things in the first place. Another consequence of indecision is we start to overvalue the importance of the outcome. So this doesn't sound that bad on the surface, but our nervous systems can actually be reacting as though we're making a critical decision when we're just deciding something small. Like your heart starts beating and your palms are sweating and you get all stressed out just choosing between the Hawaiian and the Santa Fe burger. And then we get so caught up in making the best decision ever that we start searching the internet for hours or Rolodexing through all of our past experiences, just stressing to find more information to help tip the scales towards one decision or the other. And then here's the real kicker. Recent scientific evidence suggests that the more information and time we have to make a decision, the less likely we are to make a good one. So needless to say, over the years, I've made it my mission to stop being so indecisive. And not only has it worked, but it's honestly made a significant difference in my life. I feel more powerful. I trust myself more. I have a better relationship with the value of things and my time. I get shit done, and not just faster, but also easier. Well, that is until pregnancy brain set in, which is real, by the way, and I feel like my brain is just cramping up, deciding whether I want a smoothie or oatmeal in the morning, but that's a whole nother story. So today we're going to be talking about how to decide. And our guest is Annie Duke. She's a corporate speaker and consultant in the decision-making space, and she's the author of How to Decide, Simple Tools for Making Better Choices, and Thinking in Bets, which is a national bestseller. I'm so excited about this because what makes Annie uniquely qualified to help us with decision-making is that, well, first of all, she was awarded a National Science Foundation Fellowship to study cognitive psychology. She's the co-founder of the Alliance for Decision Education, which is a nonprofit whose mission is to improve lives by empowering students through decision skills education. And she actually used to be a professional poker player, and she's won more than $4 million in tournament poker before retiring from the game in 2012. So she took what she learned from all of those high-stakes decisions and drilled down the teachings of how to approach the choices, big or small, that we make every day. So 3 key things we will learn are how the hindsight bias screws with our decisions, how to better identify the obstacles that might get in our way, and when to bring out our full decision toolkit versus when to act quickly. But before we dive in, do you wish there was a way to start each day with a positive mindset? Just sign up for the Morning Mind Love for daily inspirational messages right to your inbox. I get messages from people every single day about how the Morning Mind Love is their favorite way to start their day, or that the message that came through is exactly what they needed to hear. It's kind of like your own personal inspiration oracle. Just visit mindlove.com and sign up right there on the homepage. Plus, you'll get some amazing free gifts when you do, like a free guided binaural affirmation meditation designed to rewire your brain to your highest self. And you'll get one of my favorite tools, a booklet of my personal power lists to help you gain clarity and live each day with intention. And it's all completely free. Just go to mindlove.com to sign up. Or if you're out and about, text the word morning to 33777. That's morning to 33777. And now let's welcome Annie Duke to the show.
Well, I'm happy to be here.
So what's your story? Why was it so important for you to focus on making better decisions?
Oh my gosh, what is my story? My trajectory looks very windy, but I think the common thread through everything that I've done as an adult has been decision making. So I started off my adult life as a PhD student at the University of Pennsylvania in cognitive science, and I was studying learning, which obviously is decision making. Then at the end, long story, I become a poker player instead of becoming an academic. And, poker is obviously a very high stakes version of decision making with lots and lots of money on the line. You have to make decisions really, really quickly. And it's a really hard decision making puzzle because there's lots and lots of luck. And then there's a whole bunch of stuff you don't know, like you can't see your opponent's cards. So I focused on that pretty solely for about 8 years. Got pretty good, won a bunch of stuff, And in 2002, I got asked by a group that was in finance actually to come talk to the people who, their decision makers about how poker might inform the way that they were thinking about risk. So this was the first time that I kind of thought about, I was doing this graduate work, which was on learning, and now I've been doing this high stakes decision making problem. There's actually kind of an interesting conversation going on between the two of them. And I started thinking about that pretty explicitly. I did play poker for 10 more years, but I started to speak and do consulting on decision strategy and how to think about decisions when there's a big influence of luck and hidden information in the decisions you're making, which is really like every decision you make in life. And then in 2012, I retired from poker to focus on a few things. One was my consulting business was getting big. So, I was running out of time for the other thing. But I also really wanted to write this book, Thinking in Bets, which came out about 3 years ago. I co-founded a nonprofit, which is called the Alliance for Decision Education, which was trying to bring these kinds of lessons to K through 12 education. So that was also something that was really important to me. And then after I did all of that, I started to talk to people who had read Thinking in Bets. There was this constant theme from them, which was, okay, how do I make good decisions though? So Thinking in Bets, my previous book, was really just about the problem of luck and uncertainty and like you don't know very much when you're making decisions and why that, like how that makes your decisions go wrong. And it was kind of a real exploration of like kind of the environment that we make decisions in. And there was a tiny little sprinkling of here's the way to help that, but not a lot. And I just kept hearing from people, okay, but how would you make a good decision then? Could you tell me how to do that? And I was like, oh, yeah, I should write that book. So 3 years later, here it is. So that's how I kind of came to that. So yeah, so everything's kind of always been about decision making for me from the beginning, from the first time that I, entered my adult life.
There's a quote in your book that I really loved, and it got me to think. And it says, even though the importance of making quality decisions seems obvious, it's surprising how few people can actually articulate how to make a good decision. And I'm wondering, why is that? Why are people so bad at making high quality decisions or even explaining the process of making a good decision?
When you were in K through 12, did you take a class on how to make a good decision?
No, not at all. And honestly, I don't even think I'm very good at it still.
Yeah. Did anybody, was that part of the curriculum? Like, hey, how would you construct a good decision?
No. And funnily enough, depending on where I'm getting my information, how to make a good decision is taught to me in completely different ways. Like in my more spiritual side, or like really getting in touch with my feminine energy in the last few years, so much about that is feeling and going with your gut. But then on the masculine side, it's more about logic and reason. And I know intuitively that we need both of those sides to make a good decision. But as far as how to come to it is pretty difficult to do.
Yeah, I think this is really generally the problem. I mean, I assume that you took trigonometry at some point in high school. And I also assume that you have used it little.
Yeah. I have used barely anything I learned in school in real life.
Right. So, I think it really comes down to we don't teach it. And when I think about why don't we teach it, I think there's a few things. I think one is that our educational system is just kind of based on outdated model, right? Like for trigonometry, that kind of goes back to the English Empire, and people would need to sail, and you actually need trigonometry to be able to sail if you don't have a computer. And you also need trigonometry to do things like raise barns. But, none of those things are things that we need it for anymore. So if somebody were to become an engineer at some point in their life, it would be good if they took that class later. But other than that, it just doesn't have a whole lot of practical application for anybody anymore. But we still teach it. And I think that the first step there would be to teach statistics and probability instead, it's like a really important part of decision making. But regardless, we should get decision education into K through 12. And when I think about, okay, why is this? Like, aside from the historical issue, I think it's because decision making, I think, feels to us kind of like walking. So you've been walking since you can remember. I imagine that you do not remember a time in your life when you did not walk.
Right.
And you probably can't really describe your process for walking, but you do it really well. I think decision making is like that, because you also can't remember a time in your life when you weren't making decisions, because you're making decisions all day, every day, and you've been doing that since you were a conscious human being. I think we kind of feel about it like walking. Well, I made decisions, I guess I just make decisions. Like, I guess I just walk.
That's actually a really good point because just recently I actually started Googling the best way to cut specific vegetables because I'm like, okay, I know I've been cutting bell peppers for like 20 years, but there's something about it I don't like. What's the best way to do this? And the same with like onions. And all of a sudden my cooking experience is completely different, but I assume that I'm good at it because I've been doing it for so long. But there is actually often a better way that somebody else has found. And I think the same thing kind of goes back to decisions. It's like just because I've been deciding what to do with my life since I was little doesn't mean that I actually have a process or a framework or I'm good at it in any capacity. Before we go deep today, I want to give you a little gift, and I want to give it to you every single day. It's called the Morning Mind Love. I know how life can be. You're all fired up after an inspiring episode, and then a new day or a new challenge comes at you, and it's just hard to keep up that energy. Well, the Morning Mind Love is kind of like an oracle from your higher self to help you start each day with a positive focus. Plus, when you sign up, you get 2 free gifts, a 30-minute binaural meditation and 30 days of journaling prompts to help you remember who you truly are. And it's all completely free. So join over 9,000 people and go to mindlove.com to sign up or text the word morning to 33777. Let's talk about legacy for a minute. We're all working so hard on personal growth and building better lives and creating something meaningful. But how do we protect everything we're building? Look, I know life insurance isn't the sexiest topic, but it might be one of the most loving things you can do for your family. We kept putting it off. It's funny how things never feel like a priority until you need it, which is the total wrong way to approach life insurance. But now that we have kids, there is no way I'm taking a chance that they won't be taken care of if something happens to me. So suddenly, this was our number 1 priority. And SelectQuote makes it surprisingly simple. They're one of America's leading insurance brokers with nearly 40 years of experience helping over 2 million customers. What makes them different is just how personal it is. Their licensed agents take the time to understand your specific situation so that they can find you the right coverage. We're talking 15 minutes to get exactly what you need. And I love that they actually reward you for all the self-work you're doing. So if you're in good health, you could get same-day coverage for up to $5 million. No medical exam needed. And it's way more affordable than you might think. Coverage up to $1 million could cost as little as $20 per month. So get the right life insurance for you for less at selectquote.com/mindlove. Go to selectquote.com/mindlove today to get started. That's selectquote.com/mindlove.
Yeah, I mean, I think you get to an even deeper point there because this is true of decision making as well. You know, when you think about like, well, I've been successfully cutting onions my whole life. When that's true and you've been getting a reasonable result, we're unlikely to go explore if there's a better way. So imagine cutting onions in a way that really makes me just like tear up, like, which is, you know, I'm just failing at not tearing up. Then I might go look for another way. But like, I know not to cut through the root. Like, as long as I don't cut through the root, I'm probably not going to get too teary from the onions. So, but once I've sort of figured that out, and now I'm like, think I'm a reasonable onion cutter, I'm unlikely to go look if there's a better way. And not in the same way that if I were failing at something, I would go examine whether there was a better way. And I think this is true of decision making as well. If I'm generally being pretty successful in whatever the endeavor is that I'm doing, I generally won't look to see if there's a better way to do it. I won't look to see if there was a better decision to be had. And that's a shame because very often we're making a good choice, but we're not necessarily making the best choice. There could be a better way to cut that onion. And it would be great if we could go find that out, but we tend not to go look for it. And I think part of the reason why we don't go look for it is that if I have a bad outcome, if something bad happens to me, then if I go and try to examine the decisions that led up to it, I already feel bad because I lost in some way. In my job, maybe I didn't get a project in on time, or maybe something really bad like I got fired, or I didn't get a promotion or something like that. I'm already pretty sad because I failed in something. So if I go and I explore the decision process, what was the decision that led to that? I can have something really good happen to me, which is I can relieve myself of my pain because I might find out that the bad outcome wasn't because I made a bad decision. It was because I got unlucky. And once I have that, then it's like, oh, okay, I don't feel so bad about myself anymore. But if you think about the reverse, I'm doing something pretty successfully. I get the project in on time, or I get the promotion, or whatever. If I go and examine the decision, how can I win to that? Because now I'm feeling pretty good about myself. I've got my chest puffed out and like, look at me, I'm succeeding. If I go in and I find out that there was a better way to do it, I could have actually even had a better result. Or that, yeah, I won, but I kind of got really lucky because I didn't actually do a very good job. I just had kind of luck go my way. Now, all of a sudden, I turned something that I felt really good about into something maybe that I don't feel so good about, at least not in the short run. So I think that this is actually a really deep problem about decision making, like this pepper cutting problem that you just brought up. It's actually a pretty deep problem about decision making is we dig in an asymmetric way. Like we don't dig in equally if we have good results or bad results, and we really should be.
That makes a lot of sense. And when we look back at our decisions, there's a reason that people always say hindsight is 20/20. But is that even true, or is hindsight just biased?
Hindsight has like goggle glasses on. I mean, it's just like, the big Coke bottle glasses. Like hindsight is so bad. So basically, so the problem with hindsight bias is that it's kind of twofold. One is that whatever happened, we feel like we knew had to happen. So, and we've all had that feeling. So I think I give an example in the book of, I was actually in a grocery store and I heard this man ask, this woman was talking and she had an accent. And this man says, "Are you Italian?" And the woman says, "No, I'm Greek." And the man says, "I knew it." Such a good example of hindsight bias. Like, what? No, because I just heard you ask if the person was Italian. Basically what happens with hindsight bias is kind of twofold. One is that, and we've all had that feeling of like, you go through a green light and you get an accident and you go, "I knew that was going to happen." No, you didn't, right? Like, what? No. And you feel like the outcome was inevitable, that was the only thing that could have happened. And then you feel like somehow you had some foresight, like you knew that was going to occur. And of course, that's absurd. If I knew I was going to get in an accident when I went through the intersection, I wouldn't have gone through it in the first place. So one of the reasonable things that we need to understand is like, in order to actually learn from experience, we should properly remember it. We should probably remember what we knew at the time. We're actually pretty bad at it. One of the examples I give in my book, which I think is like a pretty powerful example, particularly in this moment in time, is the way that people think about Hillary Clinton in 2016. I think is a really good example of hindsight bias. So she's campaigning, and we know that everybody was talking about the blue wall, right? Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan. And the polls were suggesting that she probably had those in the bag. They tightened a little bit at the end after James Comey made his announcement. They tightened. But then she actually did spend some time in Pennsylvania after that happened, after they tightened a little bit. But obviously leading up to that kind of last week, she was more focusing on Florida, which was polling as a toss-up. She was definitely focusing on New Hampshire, which was polling as a toss-up. She was spending some time in Arizona and North Carolina that were looking like they might open up some interesting paths for her to win. She was not spending so much time in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan. Okay, so that's the beforehand. Now, so after the fact, we know what happened. She lost all three of those states. And, we all know how everybody talks about that. She made such a huge mistake. That was so bad. She should have been in those three states. She bungled the election, so arrogant that she thought that those states were going to be in her pocket. Well, we've all heard all those things said about her. Mm-hmm. So I think this is a really good example of hindsight bias, because we can now do the process. Because what really matters to whether a decision is good, whether you made a mistake, is first of all, what was your state of knowledge at the time you made the decision? And second of all, what was reasonable for you to know? We want to ask those two things, and then what revealed itself after the fact. So we can start off with the polls. There was a polling error, but obviously a polling error by definition reveals itself after the fact, because you have to take the vote to know there was an error. So then you can say, okay, so could she have known there was a polling error beforehand, before the vote was taken? And that's kind of a tough one. So we can approach that from two ways. One is there were polling errors in other states as well, but they actually went in the opposite direction. So there was a polling error in both Texas and Virginia, but they went in Clinton's favor. So that feels a little bit hard. If it's not consistent across all states, like it feels hard for her to know, like there's a polling error and to know exactly what the direction of that polling error is. That seems like that would be a tough one for her to know. And the second thing we can say is if it was knowable, given how many people write about an election, I think it's reasonable to assume that somebody would have said something about it at the time, that somebody would have paid attention to this beforehand. You can actually Google search that. You can say, hey, all the data scientists from Silicon Valley and the political observers and the journalists and the strategists, were people writing about, hey, just watch out. There might be a polling error and a consistent one in Trump's favor in these 3 states. And so, Clinton, you better get your butt over there. So we can just ask that question. We can do the Google. And the Google search reveals crickets. There just isn't anything. But even if I tell you all of that, people who are listening to this are probably thinking, no, she did make a mistake. No, people did know about it at the time. And that's how powerful hindsight bias is. It makes us feel like we're seeing the past really clearly, but we're really, really not. Because when we actually dig down into this really important question, which was, but what did she know at the time? What we find out is that, well, of course she couldn't have known that at the time. But it doesn't matter even on an intellectual level that I can tell you that, because as soon as I walk away and you're thinking about her having lost there, you're still going to go back to thinking it was a mistake. So think about how many times that's happening to you in your life. It's a little bit mind-boggling when you start realizing how pervasive that problem is.
Right. And so much of it has to do with, this sounds kind of funny, but your relationship with yourself. Because on a few different levels, my hindsight bias, I like to find the meaning in things. And so my bias tends to steer towards what happened was meant to happen, and I have to find that meaning. And so I will always figure out in my head why it actually had to happen. I don't really lean towards the mistakes. But if people are used to being I screwed up, then I feel like oftentimes their hindsight bias is how they made a mistake. And maybe that's a whole different discussion. But I think the more our emotions are wrapped up into it, if that person really wants to believe that it was Hillary's fault, their emotions are already wrapped into it. And it's harder to logic your way out of your emotions than it is to logic your way out of your reasoning.
Right. And the thing is that we kind of have to try to do that, though, because the problem is that we can take really bad lessons from the past then as we I assume everybody wants to be a better decision maker going forward. And I actually just have a piece that I put up about this, which is when you look at what the Democrats have been spending in Michigan this time, it's a little bit bizarre because Biden has been polling well outside of the margin of error since April or May. And they've spent, I think, something if you combine Georgia and Ohio together, which are actual very swingy states this time, they spent 12% or so of the resources on those 2 states that they spent in Michigan alone. And you ask yourself, well, why would that be? He's been ahead by about 9 points in Michigan, which is well outside the margin of error since May. Why would there be so much spending happening there? And not in states that are actually where it's polling as a toss-up. So you have to understand, even if there were a polling error of the size that there was last time, he would still win Michigan. That's what I'm saying. You could still have the exact same polling error and still win Michigan. But yeah, he's spending so much money there. And I think one of the reasonable explanations for that is nobody wants to make the same mistake twice. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. And that's where you can allow these biases can get really emotional, and you can start making some pretty bad decisions just trying to defend against not having that thing happen to you again. But the decisions about where you spend your money this time should have nothing to do with what happened to Clinton in 2016. They should be fresh, brand new decisions that have to do with where is the polling now. And he's a stronger candidate in Michigan than Clinton was. But you see this huge spending. So trust me, you're doing this in your life all the time, just trying to defend against sort of not having the same bad thing happen to you again. Because in some way you do view it as a mistake. And even if you don't view it as a mistake and you view it as a meant to be, that also can be kind of equally, it can also be an issue if you end up acting on that it was meant to be. If you end up trying to take a lesson out of something that doesn't really have much of a lesson in it. As an example, what we want to think about when we enter a decision is when I make a decision, there's just a whole bunch of ways that something could turn out. There isn't one thing that has to happen. There's a lot of different things that could happen. If I go on a date with someone, it could be the greatest date in the world. It could be kind of okay. It could be borderline bad. It could be terrible. And when I go into that date, I don't know which thing it's going to be. All I know is that it's worth my while to explore the particular person that I want to go out on the date with. That's what I know. But all of those things could occur. When the date turns out to be horrible, it doesn't mean it was a mistake to go out on the date. Because, of course, it could have been horrible. I know that going in. I mean, any reasonable person who thinks about, okay, I've never been on a date with someone, could it be bad? Everybody would say yes. But when you look back on it in retrospect, you say, ugh, Of course it was going to be bad. What a mistake. Or maybe you say it was meant to be, that was supposed to be a bad date. Well, no, it wasn't meant to be, because there's lots of different ways that date could have turned out. And what I really care about is, what are the things that happened with that date where maybe like, what did I learn? Are there things I could look out for in the future when I'm thinking about who I want to go out on a date with? So that the next time that you pick someone to go out on a date with, you just do a better job. That's what you care about. And I think that what happens is that as we're looking toward the future, we can tell that there's all sorts of different branches of, like, we can look at it like a tree, like we're looking up at a tree and there's all sorts of different branches and there's all sorts of different ways that our lives could turn out. We all know that when we're looking forward. But then when the thing that happens actually happens, it's like we just take a chainsaw to all those branches. And there's different ways to interpret that one thing that occurred once you've sort of lost sight of the fact that there were all sorts of ways things that could happen. One is to say it was a mistake. That's very hard on yourself because you actually want to think about it in a different way. The other is meant to be. And I personally don't think that you lose the spiritual side of it by not saying that it was meant to be, but by saying this is how it turned out, and I need to figure out how to incorporate that into my whole self as I think about how to get what I want out of life and fulfill my goals and be the person that I want to be going forward. And if I can lose that feeling of it was meant to be, that's actually going to help me to achieve the things that I want for myself in life, because I'm going to have a better view of what the future looks like as well as the past. I don't know if that makes sense.
It totally does. And to me, I think even with the understanding that it's worth it a lot of the times to go back and reflect and look in retrospect on how you can learn from that, that alone might be the reason it was meant to be. It's like, I learned something from this. This
fair.
is a learning experience.
That's very meta. I like that. That's very meta. That's good. I like that.
This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. The holidays mean more travel, more shopping, more time online, and more personal info in places that could expose you to identity theft. That's why LifeLock monitors millions of data points every second. If your identity is stolen, their US-based restoration specialist will fix it, guaranteed or your money back. Get more holiday fun and less holiday worry with LifeLock. Save up to 40% your first year. Visit LifeLock.com/podcast. Terms apply.
This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Upgrade your business with Shopify, home of the #1 checkout on the planet. Shop Pay boosts conversions up to 50%, meaning fewer carts going abandoned and more sales going cha-ching. So if you're into growing your business, get a commerce platform that's ready to sell wherever your customers are. Visit Shopify.com to upgrade your selling today.
So I'm curious, though, a lot of this reminds me of, there's this show on Netflix called The Good Place, and one of the people is like stuck in purgatory. Well, Chitty is stuck in decision making, and every single thing he decides, he's indecisive, and he's like, but what about this, and what about this? And it wastes a bunch of his time, and he basically ended up in purgatory. So How do we know when is a good time to bring out our full decision toolkit and when it's better to just act quickly?
I'll talk about Chitty's problem first.
Okay.
His problem is that once he sort of narrowed the world down into things that he could do that would be okay, he can't decide between them. This is a very specific problem that a lot of people have. So I'll give you the thought experiment. Let's pretend it's before COVID.
Okay. Perfect.
I'm going to pretend it's before COVID.
That's all I want to pretend.
Yeah. So it's before COVID, and you've got your big vacation that you want to take for the year, and you're trying to decide between Paris and Rome. So you've kind of thought it through, and you like, here's the thing, and even for Chidi, this is true. If I tell you, would you rather go to a vacation in Paris or to a vacation in meatpacking plant? What would your choice be?
Paris.
Right. And even Chidi doesn't have a problem with that choice, right? Because it's just so clear that the meatpacking plant would suck as a vacation. Okay. So where people get into trouble is when you get into the Paris and Rome situation. Okay, I've got these two things. They're pretty good. They're going to really matter. Like how my vacation goes is going to matter to me a lot. But I can't decide between the two of them. It's too hard And I think that part of this gets into this problem with viewing things not going well as a mistake. Because you kind of get caught in this, like, but what if I go to Paris and it's raining the whole time? I'll feel like I made a mistake. But the issue is that you could say the exact same thing about Rome. What if I go to Rome and it's raining all the time? I'll feel like I made a mistake. And so what you're trying to do is take these two things that are pretty equal to each other, and you're trying to parse the differences between the two. And all of a sudden you find yourself like spending all your time on TripAdvisor, unable to decide, asking everybody for their opinion. 2 months go by and you still haven't made your choice. So what's interesting about that is that decision I know feels very hard to people. But the fact that it's hard is actually a signal that it's quite easy. And the reason is that it's what I call a sheep in wolf's clothing, because we know about the wolf in sheep's clothing, right? This is a sheep in wolf's clothing, an easy decision that looks quite hard. Because what's hanging you up about those two, about Paris or Rome, is that they're the same. They're both fabulous European vacations that have an equal likelihood of you having great food and being able to see great historical monuments and amazing museums and a beautiful, beautiful architecture and amazing city. And there's not very much difference between them. And we get into this illusion that like somehow if we just spent more time, we could figure out the difference between the two of them. So it's like you pretty much can't. So here's how to get out of that particular problem is to do what's called the only option test. When you find yourself starting to get into that analysis loop on two things that are pretty equal, just say, if Paris were the only choice that I had for my fabulous European vacation, and I'll ask you this, Melissa, would you be happy with that as your only choice?
Yes, I would.
What if Rome were your only choice? What was that? The only choice that you had, the only place that you could go? You won it on a game show. They're going to send you to Rome.
I'd be pretty stoked, yeah.
You'd be pretty stoked. So once you have things that satisfy this only option test, just go with your gut or flip a coin or ask somebody else to decide for you. I don't really care. Because the point is you can't be making a mistake either way because they are so similar. So we want to spend our analysis time on the sorting problem. How do we get to a bunch of choices that pass the only option test? That's the way that I know that I don't want to go to a meatpacking plant. I don't want to go to Gary, Indiana. I'd rather go to Paris, right? Like, so figure out what those things are. And then once you have things that are kind of in that, like, if it were my only option, I'd be pretty happy. Just that's where like your gut becomes a really good decision-making process. Just let your gut, let your gut choose between the two and just be done with it and just get it over with. That brings us to two other things that we can think about that would help Chidi a lot. One is that he also got caught up on decisions that don't matter very much. So he would be someone who can't order off a menu, can't decide what to watch on Netflix, that kind of thing. So when we look at like what to watch on Netflix, what to order off a menu, in the before times what to wear, because now we all just put on sweatpants, but beforehand, the average person spends about 6 to 7 work weeks a year on those decisions.
Oh my gosh.
I think the average menu time is about 14 minutes. So here's the problem with that, is that's time you could be spent doing other things. I don't know, like talking to the people that you're at the table with. But we all know those people, right? Like they can't decide and then the wait person comes over and it's like, what would you like? Let me go last. Everybody has to go before me. I don't know what I want to do. But we can think about this. We can now add to the only option test because obviously we can apply the only option test to that too, right? Like once you have it narrowed down to 2 options that pass the only option test, like just go with your gut or flip a coin or whatever. But this is even better. You really shouldn't spend any time on that decision because you can imagine, like, let's say that my chicken's super dry. Let's just pretend. So let's say we have a meal, actually, Melissa, and you get really, your chicken's horrible. You push it aside. I'm assuming you don't get food poisoning, but that's equally likely across all the dishes on the menu because if you get food poisoning from a restaurant, it's probably not just a one-dish problem. So, okay, so you order chicken, it's terrible, it's super dry. But now I see you a year later, and I say to you, hey, do you remember that really yucky chicken that you had a year ago? Has it affected your happiness today, a year later? Would you say over the past year, did that have any effect on your happiness today?
No, probably not.
Okay. Now, let's say that I catch you in a month and I say, hey, Melissa, remember when we had that meal a month ago and you had that dry chicken? As you think about how happy you've been over the course of the month, would you say that that meal that you had a month ago where the chicken was kind of dry had much of an effect on your happiness today?
I would really hope not.
Yeah. What about if I catch you a week later? To have a big effect on your happiness over the course of the week?
Still probably not.
Still probably not. So this would be a good exercise for Chidi. Because what this tells you is that that decision doesn't matter. Like, even if I tell you it turned out poorly, it doesn't affect your happiness at all. In which case, why are you spending a lot of time on it? Go spend your time on something that's going to make you a lot happier. Because what Chidi's afraid of is that he gets it wrong. So live in that. Say, what if I do get it wrong? What if it sucks? Am I going to care in a week, a month, a year? And if the answer is no, then don't be afraid of getting it wrong, because then you realize it's not going to matter anyway. So, treat life like a menu, whether it's Paris or Rome or chicken or fish. Sort out the options you don't like. I hate eggplant. I'm not going to consider it. I don't want to go on a vacation where I have to be on a plane for 14 hours. So I'm not going to consider anything that's that far away, right? Like figure out those things for yourself that have to do with your values and your goals, like how well you know yourself. That's going to allow you to sort things, sort out the stuff that you wouldn't consider. Then once you've done that sorting, that's what you should be spending your time on. And you've got some stuff that all passes the only option test. It's all pretty good. Then just pick. Don't spend any time on it.
Right. And I think a better use of that time would be figuring out how to be okay with the decisions you've already made rather than how to make the perfect right one. Because I do know people who will sit there no matter what they order. It's like, oh, this is too dry. Oh, this is blah, blah, blah. And it's like they're always focused on how it could have been better, which makes it even difficult to enjoy what you've just chosen. Whereas then if your new goal is how to become okay with these smaller decisions, and I guess, yes, this does work better for smaller decisions, but then it's kind of like a fun little experiment. It's like, okay, the worst case scenario, I've got something to practice now.
And what's great is that it works really well for bigger decisions. Because if what you understand about Paris and Rome is that it could rain in both cities. You could go to a restaurant in either city and have something unlucky happen to you, like, you could get food poisoning on the first day that you're there. Both of them could be fabulous, but both of them could have things go wrong. I went to Rome a few years ago, and it was some weird cold snap. And, me and my kids were to the Colosseum in 30-degree weather without the right clothes. It was freezing. But like that, so, okay, but that's okay. It's just a matter of luck. And that doesn't mean I made the wrong choice or I wish I'd gone to the other place. Because the whole point is that the chances that it rains or you have a cold snap or you eat some bad food or whatever, it's the same either way, whichever one you chose. So you should just be kind of like, okay, this is life. There's luck sometimes is good, luck sometimes is bad. And in this particular case, the chances I got bad luck were going to be the same either way. And so I'm not going to sit there and live in the what ifs. Well, what could have been if I went to Paris? Like, okay, who cares? The other thing that I think is really good with the Paris or Rome thing is that I think we get caught up in the feeling that we have in the moment that it's bad, and we don't think about the value that might give us going forward. So this is the thing that I do with my kids all the time. When something is really bad is happening, sometimes even when they're pissed at me for something, because like I grounded them or something like that, I have this thing that I say to them all the time, which is imagine when you're 40 and you're at the Thanksgiving table. How awesome is this going to be? So when we were freezing cold in Rome that day, and everybody was like shivering, and it was beautiful to be at the Parthenon, but we're all really cold. It was really tough to be there because we didn't have warm enough clothes. I just said to them, think about how great this story is going to be. We went to Rome and it was supposed to be an average temperature of 63, and we all packed for that. And then we come out to the Colosseum, and it's 32 degrees. This is hilarious. We get to tell this story for the rest of our lives. I'm going to be old and doddering. I'm going to be at your house for Thanksgiving. We're going to tell that story about, do you remember when? How awesome is that?
Right. And it's like, in this moment, this thing that makes it harder or that makes it less ideal is actually also making it more memorable. So what are you going to do knowing that? Are you going to complain the whole time? Are you going to talk about how you made a bad decision? Or are you going to figure out how to make the best of the fact that it's freezing and laugh at it and create a memory that you actually enjoy sharing about later instead of just complaining about till the end of time?
Yeah. And I think the other thing that's really important when we're kind of looking at these things is to understand that there are things we can control and things we can't. And if what's happening is something that you couldn't control, then why are you killing yourself over it? Sadly, I don't control the weather. I just don't. So here I am in this situation. Why should I make it worse? I got some bad luck. I don't want to do anything to make it worse. I want to figure out how to turn it into something good. And the way I can do that is not by sitting there going, I can't believe this. My vacation is ruined. No, my vacation wasn't ruined. I get to tell the story about freezing at the Coliseum for the rest of my life. It's great. I had another one of these things. Oh gosh, my husband and I were down in Mexico and we like rented a car to drive around somewhere. And I don't know, for some reason, like the car rental place was like 10 minutes from the place that we were staying. And I don't know why, we just couldn't find our way back. It was so hilarious. For 2 hours, we're driving through this city and we keep like going past the same landmarks. And we really can't we just can't find our way back. And the problem was it wasn't a hotel. So we couldn't ask anybody, like, can you just direct us to this hotel? Because it was like a residence, it was like an Airbnb kind of thing. And for some reason, like, we just thought we'd be able to find our way back. So we didn't like have the address or anything. And it was just, anyway, like we're lost. It was like 2 hours. We were lost. And we were laughing the whole time. It was so funny because we kind of knew like, this is going to be the greatest story about how we got lost 10 minutes from the place we were staying in the middle of Mexico. And we were so stupid. We hadn't written the address down anywhere. It was just so stupid. Yeah, it wasn't a tourist town, so nobody spoke English. And so we couldn't really say like, oh, we kind of know where the street is. Can you help us? Like, it was just, we did finally make our way back, but it was funny.
I did the same thing, actually. My friend and I were trying to get back to our car during Coachella Music Festival, and we just wanted to go stop and like grab something and then go back into the concert. I look back at this time, we walked around for 4 hours. We didn't give up. And then we finally just decided, let's just go home, and we called an Uber and had it take us home. Like, it was the dumbest thing, but honestly, like, we actually made that walk was so memorable. We had just as much fun as if we were actually in the music festival anyway, so it wasn't that big of a deal. But I'm curious though, is there a way to get better at identifying some of the obstacles that might get in our way, or is it better to just kind of let them pass and trust your gut?
So yes, there is, and no, don't let them pass and trust your gut. So we can think about like the thing that happened to me in Mexico. Obviously the power of positive thinking is like a really big literature and people really love it. But the problem with the power of positive thinking is that it's kind of implied in there. Like if you imagine success, then that will make you succeed. And if you imagine failure, that will make you fail. Except that if you imagine failure, it's actually the case that will make you succeed. And you can think about it this way, like we used to have old atlases that were filled with paper maps, and you would look at them and you'd say, okay, here's the destination I want to get to. And then you'd see just like a clear road, right, to that destination. And that's kind of how I think about the power of positive thinking. Like you sort of see the route and you just imagine you kind of sail on your way through that. But nobody uses paper maps anymore. People use Waze. And what Waze is doing is saying, hey, just so you know, there's really bad traffic ahead. If you go that way, you're going to fail to get to where you want to go. Or there's a road closure over here. So if you go that way, it's going to really mess you up. And what it does is allow you to kind of direct around them or to prepare for it. So if I know there's bad traffic kind of in any route that I want to get to, I can leave extra time. So you can see how I could have applied that like to the Mexico situation. If I had said, I'm in Mexico and people don't speak English and I don't speak Spanish. So let me imagine how this little 10-minute trip might go wrong. I could have figured out pretty easily I might get lost, at which point it would have been really good to write down somewhere what the address of the place I was staying was, and then also maybe draw it out on a map how I might get back, right? Like I could have done that. And then we would have been going around for 2 hours. Now, obviously, I made the best of the situation, but I would have preferred to get back to where I was going, where my kids were. That would have been much better. But I could have seen that obstacle that might be in my way. People say to me, but isn't that like, don't you think that you're going to be like negative then, like a Debbie Downer or something? And I'm like, no, because that's actually the way they're going to succeed. I'm going to see what can go wrong. And then when I see what can go wrong, I can actually do something about it. And that's going to mean that I'm going to flourish much more in my life. When I run against things that go wrong, I'm not going to be sitting there going, I can't believe this is happening to me. I'm so unlucky. How terrible. Woe is me. I'm going to say, well, I knew this was a possibility. And by the way, I have a plan. I'm prepared for this. Or maybe I don't encounter the obstacle at all because I actually thought about it in advance. That's fine. I think that that's kind of the opposite of being negative. I think that's the way through this kind of, the power of negative thinking, meaning the power of imagining the obstacles that might get in your way. That's the way to actually flourish and succeed. So that's the way that I kind of think about the world. Actually, now that I think about it, I should have thought about that a little bit more in Mexico, but I didn't.
Well, I think the final way that we tend to have the opportunity to learn from something in the past before we do it is when we're learning from other people. I tend to be the type of person that likes to learn the hard way, or historically, I have liked to learn the hard way. I'm trying to get better at that. But what I found too is that people seem very convicted in their past experience, and it might not always be right. There's a lot of times that same bias that we talked about earlier, the hindsight bias. And people like when people listen to their feedback. And so I found that people tend to exaggerate it even more. Like, oh my gosh, that country was the absolute worst. Never go there. And it's just like, why? Because you had a bad meal in Paris? Like, what is it? And so how do we start to get better at actually leveraging the knowledge from other people instead of taking the hard route?
I think one of the things we need to realize is that all these biases that we think about living in other people live in ourselves as well. So whatever you see from somebody else, understand that you're doing that too. I think that we see that in politics all the time now. Democrats look at Republicans and they say they're so biased. They're not thinking about the information correctly. They're idiots. And Republicans look at Democrats and they say they're so biased. They don't look at the information correctly. They're such idiots. And the thing is that we have to realize is that there are things that Democrats have wrong and things that Republicans have wrong. And the other thing is that there are things that I might value that make the things that I believe to be true right for me, but maybe not right for you. I think we're bad at that one too. Maybe I love a beach vacation and you don't, and that's okay. That doesn't mean you're wrong. I remember with my kids when they were growing up, like somebody would be eating a food and the other one would be like, oh my God, that's disgusting. Why are you eating that? And it was like, because they're not you. And I'm sure we've all experienced that. Somebody saying like, oh my God, that's gross. Like, or you say like, I love eggplant. And somebody says, you're wrong. It's like, no, they're not wrong. Neither of you is wrong or right. Like, I don't even know what you're saying. But I think that that's naturally how we think about the world. And that's what's called the inside view, is that the things that we believe to be true of the world, our goals, our values, things that we like and dislike, we view the world through that lens. But it's really helpful for us to actually explore the way that other people view the world. For a couple of reasons, it's good to understand other people. It makes us better in terms of our relationships with other people. But the other thing is sometimes we're wrong in some way, small or big. And it's good to discover that. And you could think about that like in a more kind of meta sense, right? Like we used to believe that the sun revolved around the earth. Then obviously somebody who believed that the earth revolved around the sun, specifically Copernicus, had told people that that's what they believed. And then some people accepted that and some people didn't. But eventually there was enough of a discussion around it that we shifted our belief that the earth revolves around the sun. And the thing is that we're all walking around with beliefs like that. There's all sorts of, you don't know necessarily which they are, but there are things that you believe that are like the sun revolves around the earth. And it's really good for you to go find Copernicus and get to talk to him and have him tell you why he thinks a different thing. I think we're pretty bad at that. So if we can actually get really good at finding out what other people think, it actually helps us to discipline the things that maybe we think that are kind of inaccurate. Because all of those things that are inaccurate are going to inform our decisions. And if, it's that junk in, junk out thing. If the information that's going into our decisions isn't very good, the decisions we make are probably not going to be very good. And there's one really specific way that you can actually find out what people think. It's the simplest thing ever, which is when you ask for their opinion, don't tell them yours first. It's like the simplest thing you can do, but you're going to find out much more truly what they believe. So, you can think about like, if I want your opinion on a movie, like let's talk about something really simple, and I say, I saw this movie, I thought it was amazing. The lead actor was incredible, whatever. And I say, what'd you think? I'm probably not going to get like the best opinion from you. Certainly not if you've thought it was terrible. Because, people like to kind of agree with each other. And now I've got this illusion that everybody believes the same things that I do, which is already a problem because that's a particular cognitive bias. It's called naive realism. We tend to think that people believe and think the same things that we do. And now I've just reinforced that because I've told you what I believe before I asked you. So if all anybody ever did for the rest of their life was, hey, what'd you think of that movie? Period. I'm trying to decide, whether I should hire this person. Give them some facts about the person. What do you think? Instead of, I think they're great. I want to hire them. What do you think? I send you an opinion piece about politics or health and fitness or something, and I send it to you and I say, oh, I think this is kind of crazy. And if you actually were to follow this exercise program, it would actually be really bad for you. What do you think? Why did I ask you in the first place? I should just send it along to you and say, what are your thoughts on this article? And we just don't do that enough.
Yeah, I found too, one of the things my husband and I talk about is we kind of took it from Napoleon Hill's Think and Grow Rich. He had this idea of an invisible council. And the more he tapped into the lives or like who specific people really were, he was able to get more insight into how they would make decisions. And he'd like, wouldn't actually ask anybody, but he'd go to his invisible council and be like, well, what would Abraham Lincoln do? What do I think this person would do? And it's something that I use now because kind of talking about an easy decision like ordering food, when we were talking about that, I realized I used to be that person that would take forever to order food and just be like, I'll order last, whatever. And when I started to declare my own values about my relationship with food, that got a lot easier. I mean, now that I'm vegan, there's normally one thing on the vegan menu and I tend to go for what's healthiest. But if I were to give my opinion about that food to my stepdad, that is not what he's looking for. Like, I could order something and be like, I'm so happy with this because afterwards, after eating it, I still feel light. I don't feel overly full or sluggish. My stepdad doesn't mind feeling that way. He wants whatever's going to taste the best. And a lot of the times that's the heartiest thing. So we'd both be disappointed in each other's perfect options. And so the more that I know about him or understand him as a person, the easier it is for me to kind of filter his opinions and decide whether or not they're right for me. And that kind of goes for everybody. In maybe instead of trying to get somebody to confirm what you were already thinking, maybe the goal is to just understand people a little bit better and learn to decide from there.
Yes, that's what I have to say about that. Yes.
Well, thank you so much for everything that you've shared with us today. I feel like I'm going to be better at making decisions already. So for listeners who are interested in learning more about you and your book, where's the best place for them to find you online?
The two places that are really good is Twitter. I'm pretty active there at AnnieDuke.com. I mean, at Annie Duke, rather. And then AnnieDuke.com is, you can contact me through there. My website, you can find out how to buy my books. You can find out if you want to hire me. You can see videos of me talking. You can get access to my articles there, the stuff that I write. So that's kind of like all things Annie Duke is over there.
All of the links to this episode will be at mindlove.com/164. So your challenge for this week is to make faster decisions. And not in every case. Remember, we did learn when to take out the full decision-making toolkit and when to act quickly. But I can almost guarantee that most of the decisions that you're making on a day-to-day basis require a little bit faster of a decision-making process than you're currently giving it. And remember, we tend to overvalue the results of the decision. And what I've learned in being an entrepreneur, that I set myself back way further when I spend so much time ruminating and procrastinating that for years before I started Mind Love, I didn't get a lot of my dreams done. I started to believe that I wasn't the type of person that could even accomplish my dreams. I thought maybe that was just for a set of super determined people. Well, then I just started to act. And I realized that in acting quickly, I might make decisions that I don't like the outcomes of. I might need to reroute, go back, do things again. But even in working that way, I get so much more done and I accomplish my dreams so much faster because I'm constantly taking action and I'm not creating all these self-beliefs by not doing anything. And even if you do have to go back and do something again, it feels so much better when you're actually doing the work than when you're sitting there just ruminating all the possibilities in your head. It's almost painful. And don't get me wrong, there is a time for that full decision-making toolkit. But usually we've worn out all of our willpower, or we're mentally exhausted, or we don't know how to decipher the value between all of these choices that we have, or the decisions that we have to make. And so when it comes to the big decisions, we just avoid them altogether. So the challenge this week being making faster decisions is so you can actually conserve your energy for those big decisions that do require more thought. So let me know how it goes. Reach out to me on Instagram at mindlovemelissa and let me know how you've been using your decision-making toolkit or just your ability to make faster decisions in your life this week. I want real concrete examples. If you absolutely love Mind Love, there are a few ways that you can support. First, you can leave a 5-star review in Apple Podcasts. It's the best place to review because that's the one that really dictates the algorithm that helps my show be successful. And the more successful I am, the better the guests that I can serve you with. The second way is to join Mind Love Premium or join my inner circle. So there's 2 ways to join the community. Both are super affordable, and one gives you access to extra episodes and meditations, and the other gives you all of that, plus also our monthly virtual calls, which are super high vibe calls. They feel like my spiritual friendship circle, which I personally really need right now. So if you want more info about that, just go to mindlove.com/premium or send me a message at melissa@mindlove.com. And last but not least, I love you all, so thanks for giving your mind a little love today, and I'll see you next week.
Thanks for tuning into Your Higher Frequency with Mind Love. Head to mindlove.com for a free gift to keep your vibes up until next week.